2024 marked the third year for NASCAR's next-gen car, as well as the eighth year with NASCAR's current set of overtime rules. But this year had more controversy than any of the other previous years since the rule's inception, seeing the Cup Series break their single-season overtime record during the 28th of 36 races on the schedule with 12 overtimes, while also setting a Cup Series race record in overtimes during Nashville with 5 attempts that completely altered the season and gave a playoff berth to Joey Logano, who through the 10-race playoffs beat out his other 15 competitors to win the championship when the season concluded in Phoenix. But what if in 2024 there was no overtimes in NASCAR, no extended laps, and the race ended at its scheduled distance every time? How would those change the outcome of those 13 races with overtime? Which drivers would benefit from this, and which would it be a detriment to? And who would host a championship trophy instead of Joey Logano at the end of the year? All of that and more will be explained in this video, but first you should make your 2025 better and subscribe to see my content all year, as 92% of my viewers aren't subscribed, meaning you're missing out sadly, for you. Anyways, to the video. For starters, we should go over what exactly overtime in NASCAR is and where it originated from, and if you don't care then skip to the chapter titled 2024. Starting in 1995 in NASCAR's newest series, the Kraft Super Truck Series, the rule was first seen under the idea that if a race hit its scheduled distance under caution, NASCAR would extend the race to try and get a green flag finish, allowing the field 2 laps to finish the race once the green flag dropped, and ending the race under caution if a yellow came out, essentially being the same thing as the current rule, but just with no limited attempts. Yet during this time still in the Cup Series, if a caution flew late in the race, NASCAR let the race end under caution if they couldn't clean up the track before the race hit its scheduled distance. However, with this, many races would still end under caution, leaving fans upset with NASCAR, sometimes choosing to pelt the track with debris to show their displeasure. To try and mitigate this, NASCAR would often throw red flags during races to allow them to complete the cleanup process without burning laps under yellow, but after multiple crashes at the end of the races due to them restarting it after the red flag, NASCAR became weary and began being inconsistent on when they would drop the red flag for cleanup, again to the dismay of fans. Eventually in 2003, NASCAR set a rule that races would have a designated last red flag lap, usually with 5 laps remaining, while also in the same year, eliminating the racing back to the line rule after the caution flag came out. The fallout of these two rules together came immediately after in April the following year though, when two of the sport's biggest drivers in Dale Jr. and Jeff Gordon were battling for the lead with 5 to go at Talladega, and the caution flew while Gordon was ahead, but Jr. was making the pass for the lead. Due to them not racing back to the line, and NASCAR not red flagging the race for cleanup, Jeff Gordon won the race under yellow flag, and that was the last straw for NASCAR's pre-overtime era. As soon after on July 17, 2004, NASCAR announced that they would swap to a green-white checkered format, allowing for one attempt to extend the race past its scheduled distance and into overtime, being debuted at the Brickyard 400 after a Ryan Newman crash with 6 to go, sending the race 1 lap past its scheduled 160. The rules stayed the same for the next 5 years through 2009, yet many races would still end under caution due to only having 1 attempt. So starting in 2010, NASCAR swapped to 3 attempts instead of 1 to finish a race, quickly getting tested during the first points race of this new rule during the 2010 Daytona 500, when the race needed multiple green-white checkers to be completed. Again, for 5 years NASCAR let the rules stay as is, but after Austin Dillon's violent catch fence crash in the summer Daytona race after a green-white checkered, the rule would once again be lowered back down to 1 entering the playoff race at Talladega in 2015. And unfortunately, the newest edition of the green-white checker didn't even make it through the weekend before being abused, as during the first attempt Jimmie Johnson and Kyle Larson wrecked on the restart, but due to the field not making it to the line before the caution came out, NASCAR decided to re-rack them and try again. However, during this, playoff driver Kevin Harvick was having an issue with his car, and if he pitted from his spot in the middle of the pack, he'd be eliminated from the playoffs. So with the season on the line, what did he decide to do?
120 feet. Green flag back in the air. The 4 not going. They wreck behind him. The green flag is out as they cross the start-finish line. Will they throw the caution?
He kinda just wrecked the field out to the line, and got away with it somehow? I don't know how that works. Anyways, again NASCAR went back to the drawing board for 2016, eventually coming up with the limited overtime restarts, but the catch being there's a line drawn at the end of the backstretch at every track, and if you wreck before that line, they'll restart the race, and if you wreck after it, they'll just end the race, that's it. So some races just blatantly as clear as day, so NASCAR manipulate when they wanted to throw a caution. I mean, look at this. Who up in that tower isn't throwing the caution for bro spinning backwards in front of the field down the Daytona backstretch? Eventually, after a year, this NASCAR would adopt the current overtime format midway through 2017, which puts us to where we are today. So with that out of the way, let's go into how 2024 would look without overtime. The first 6 weeks of the NASCAR season would start off the exact same as they did with overtime, as none of the races included an overtime finish, seeing William Byron, Daniel Suarez, Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell and Denny Hamlin all lock their way into the playoffs with wins, with Byron as the only repeat winner of the bunch, using his Daytona 500 and COTA victories. But during the 7th week of the season at Richmond is when the first change to the winners list of 2024 occurs, as after Martin Truex Jr. led 228 of the 398 laps in the race, Bubba Wallace would turn Kyle Larson with 2 to go, resulting in an overtime restart and gifting Denny Hamlin his second win of the season, after a controversial restart. Yet in this, the caution flag ends the race under yellow, with Truex Jr. capturing his final career NASCAR win at Richmond in his final full-time season, instead of him going winless the entire year, bringing the different winners total up to 6 for the season. The next week at Martinsville saw another overtime finish for the second straight week, after a John Hunter Nemechek issue late in the race. But this wouldn't have much of an effect, as either way William Byron was leading at the time of the caution, and won the race off of overtime anyways, for his third win in the first 7 races, being the only driver to manage to win multiple races in the young season so far. Again for the third week in a row at Texas, the series was sent into overtime after a flurry of cautions in the final 30 laps, carried over until Denny Hamlin finally wrecked in turns 3 and 4 with 2 to go, racing Chase Elliott for the lead to bring out the yellow. Elliott went on to win this race either way with or without overtime. However, this race would be the first one to play a major role in the points battle, as instead of being credited with a second place finish and 45 points, had the race ended at the moment of caution, Chastain would be dumped by William Byron down the backstretch of the white flag, granting him a 32nd place finish and 16 points, being a nearly 30-point swing for him. The series stayed overtime free through Talladega and Dover, seeing Tyler Reddick lock his way into the playoffs, as well as Denny Hamlin joining William Byron as a multi-time winner on the season. Yet overtime would again be needed the following week at Kansas, following a Kyle Busch spin late in the race. The ensuing overtime restart led to the closest finish in Cup Series history between Chris Buescher and Kyle Larson. But with this rule, it was Denny Hamlin taking home the victory in back-to-back weeks under caution to stop the hard-charging Martin Truex Jr., while Larson finished all the way back in 5th. It would be another 5 weeks until the next overtime finish in the Cup Series, and in the meantime Brad Keselowski locked his way into the playoffs with a win at Darlington, Christopher Bell won a rain-shortened Coca-Cola 600, Kyle Larson won in his home state of California at Sonoma, and the Penske teammates of Austin Cindric and Ryan Blaney would each punch their ticket into the playoffs with wins at Gateway and Iowa. However, during the halfway race of the year, New Hampshire dealt with poor weather all day, eventually leading to NASCAR throwing on wet weather oval tires in order for them to complete the race. The tires threw a wrench in the plan of the teams and drivers, as they were quickly forced to adjust to the new conditions, and this led to more than enough cautions from the race, ending in an overtime win from Christopher Bell after pulling away from the field on the restart, which would have been the same outcome just under yellow had Brad Keselowski's 2 to go spin ended the race instead of bringing out overtime. Another major shift occurred the very next week at Nashville, with Denny Hamlin being credited with the win following Austin Cindric's spin, instead of a 5 overtime showdown that ended up granting Joey Logano a win and a playoff berth. Under the normal overtime rules, Ross Chastain would be cleaned out by Kyle Larson in turn 1, costing him another huge chunk of points, this time being around 30, while Ty Gibbs and Kyle Busch experienced similar issues. Yet on the flip side, Joey Logano capitalized and turned what would have been a 14th place run into a win. But with no overtime, instead of being locked into the playoffs, Logano was just now 22 points ahead of Bubba Wallace for the final playoff spot, along with Chastain having nearly double the gap to the playoff cut line coming up to the final 7 races. The sport took a 2-race overtime break during the Chicago street race in Pocono, being won by Alex Bowman and Ryan Blaney, before starting up a 4-race stretch that included every race having overtime. This stretch would first start at Indy when another surprise winner occurred, as instead of Kyle Larson taking home the Brickyard 400, following multiple overtime attempts, it'd be Brad Keselowski capturing his second win of the season on a fuel mileage win, holding off Ryan Blaney and a hard-charging Kyle Larson, after a Kyle Busch late race spin brought out a yellow to end the race. At this point in the season, drivers had began showing whether overtime was a detriment or an assistance to their season, with Chris Buescher and Bubba Wallace each capitalizing on it and gaining an extra 20 points. While Ross Chastain had lost over 70 points in races having overtime finishes, sitting just 7 points ahead of the cut line instead of having a 1-race advantage over 17th. The points battle for the final playoff spot would be heating up entering the final 4 races, with 16th and 17th being separated by just 2 points, Yet again, it would be flipped on its head the next week without overtime during the summer Richmond race, seeing Austin Dillon have an improbable run to pass Denny Hamlin late in the race and seal his ticket into the playoffs once the yellow flag came out with 2 to go to end the race after Ricky Stenhouse turned Ryan Preece. The other result of having no overtime would be Logano finishing in a solid 3rd place to assist his playoff hopes, instead of him being wrecked from the lead in the final corner with overtime, while Chris Buescher would end the night 20th to erase his 20-point advantage and put him now -6 to the playoff cut line. All 3 of the drivers near the cut line would be involved in an incident at Michigan, with only Buescher being able to recover, sitting in 14th with 6 to go when a race-ending yellow came out for a questionable call for a caution. Tyler Reddick won the race in overtime, as well as leading when the yellow came out, with Bubba finishing 27th and Logano finishing 33rd. This allowed Buescher to extend his points gap to 19 over the cut, before entering the biggest wildcard of the regular season at Daytona. And to nobody's shock, the race would be sent into overtime, for Josh Berry blowing over down the backstretch with 2 to go. However, once the yellow flag dropped to end the race, it was Kyle Busch in front to snap his winless streak, allowing him to make the playoffs over Harrison Burton had this went to overtime. Everyone trying to point their way into the playoffs would be slotted down one position, entering the regular season finale at Darlington, having just 2 playoff spots available, being occupied by Ross Chastain and Ty Gibbs. No overtime was needed at Darlington to complete the race, and at the end of 500 miles, Chase Briscoe collected Stewart-Haas Racing's final win, while also being the 15th different winner of the regular season. The win knocked Ty Gibbs out of the playoffs, who had his chances dashed after a late race crash while racing for a top 5. And with that, it was just Ross Chastain who pointed his way into the playoffs by 21 points over Ty Gibbs, seeing over a 70-point swing in his favor by the end of the regular season, having no overtime. Once the playoffs began, the next overtime finish occurred during the second race at Watkins Glen, but it would remain unchanged, as either way Chris Buescher remained victorious. At the end of the round of 16, the first 4 drivers eliminated would be Brad Keselowski, the RCR duo of Kyle Busch and Austin Dillon, as well as Martin Truex Jr., while William Byron would only advance by just 17 points as a 12th and final driver. Once the bracket got reset, immediately Ross Chastain won his way into the round of 8 with his win at Kansas, which would be a complete 180 to a season compared to how it actually went, as he sat in 17th in the standings at this point following his win with overtime. The last overtime finish of the year took place at Talladega following the huge one, ending the race with a Ricky Stenhouse win no matter what took place. And during the elimination race at the Roval, Tyler Reddick would advance to the round of 8 after an Alex Bowman DQ erased all of his hopes, while the exact same 4 drivers who got eliminated with overtime would end up getting eliminated without it. Moving on to the round of 8, it was Tyler Reddick to first punch his ticket to Phoenix after an incredible last lap drive to go from 3rd to 1st at Homestead, while the next week Ryan Blaney would also pull off an impressive charge to the field to secure his spot in the final 4. The final 2 positions would be taken by William Byron and Christopher Bell, as even with the last lap BQ he still made it through, even though in this format I'm sure he never would have even tried to ride the wall. Kyle Larson would end up as the first eliminated down 7 points, being joined by Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott, while Ross Chastain's run would come to an end with a very disappointing round of 8, closing it out down 80 points to the cut line. With the final 4 set entering Phoenix, seeing the only swap being Christopher Bell for Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney would easily cruise to a championship in back-to-back seasons, making him a 2-time champion had the sport not used overtime in 2024. The biggest winner from overtime is very evident in this, as Joey Logano would have finished 18th in the final standings without it, and with it he was your 2024 champion. We were 20 seconds away from it, man. It's so close. The biggest loser from having overtime would end up being Ross Chastain, as with it he finished all the way down in 19th in the standings, while without it he would have finished top 10 in points, as well as making it to the round of 8, as Chastain watched well over an entire race's worth of points get taken away from him during overtime restarts. And that'll do it for this video. If you enjoy it, like and subscribe, and if you want to see a part 2 on a different season, let me know in the comments. And I'll see you guys for the next one.
And Ryan Newman wins the Goodies Fast Relief 500.
That was my pick. I mean, all along, I thought surely Newman would win this thing.